artists back then would say,
right.
I'm underground. And we would say in our world, well, you're only underground because you can't be major. It wasn't like it was like, I'm keeping it real. Like there was like a whole model. How many songs came out with is real, this is real, you know.
Yeah.
The motto was that, but the truth was we were all going after the gold.
What's up? I'm Vanessa from Double XL, editor-in-chief, here with Courtney, our record exec extraordinaire, who, you know, is all over the place. And we have Dru Ha, co-founder of Duck Down and 3D, as our special guest today.
Honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Courtney, you jump in right away, because I know you're ready to go.
That's right. First and foremost, thank you for joining us, Dru Ha.
Oh, man. I get that phone call and I get, you know, I'm just like, wow. So it's still humbling to me. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Very easy to put everything together with. It was nice.
So this is going to be an amazing chat. So Duck Down, first thing I think of, home of the original gun clappers. That's the tag.
He came in saying that as soon as he walked in, he was ready to go.
Yeah.
So when did you start Duck Down, and how did you start it?
Well, I'm going to say first, just because of where we are, like we're on Canal and Broadway doing this, and I think of, when you say that, and of course, is Bucktown, right, comes to mind. I think that early on, we took out a billboard right on the Manhattan Bridge, on the intersection of Canal and that bridge. It said Bucktown, and like Smif-N-Wessun like literally renamed that borough.
Wow.
You know, it's like some artists can say they've done certain things, but like they literally renamed the borough, and I'm reminiscing as you asked me that.
It's nostalgia.
But that takes me all the way back to, you know, 95 is like when we officially formed Duck Down.
Wow.
So we're coming up on our 30-year anniversary.
That's tremendous,
Yeah.
right? And to still be around doing it,
Yeah, absolutely.
We had like a little, you know, at first it was like management company for Black Moon, and then Smif-N-Wessun came under that umbrella. Buckshot brought them in. And then we were like, all right, we started trying to figure out what the record label aspect of that could look like, and we formed Duck Down Enterprises, which...
So it started out as management first, and then went into... How did it morph into that?
It morphed into it because we were looking around the whole music business at the time. You had like No Limit, you had Bad Boy, you had Loud, like there were other... I'm not gonna say they were indie labels, but you had these, you know, sub-labels that were coming in with their own style, their own names, their own marketing, things that they were doing, and we felt we were on an independent label called Nervous Records.
Who's we? Who's we?
When I'm referring we, I'm saying Black Moon and Smif-N-Wessun.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Because Buckshot became my partner in Duck Down Management, where he actually brought me in to be a manager. That's a whole story in itself. And then we eventually looked for, you know, we were like, all right, the way to expand this is to bring in more artists.
Right.
And he introduced me to a few. I think in the beginning he was like setting me up. He brought me one artist, and it was like terrible. he was
testing you.
I almost think that he was testing me.
How's your ear? Yeah, you know.
And I told him, I was like, Buck, look, this is like 20-year-old me, and I'm still like in awe being around him. So I was very careful with my words, but I was like, Buck, I don't know, like this doesn't sound like music you would make, or like what excites me. And then he was like, all right. He's like, I got something else, and he did an in-store in New Jersey. And there's a great clip that I'll forward to you guys, or you can look it up, whatever. I literally had the camcorder. Evil D puts on Deep Cover, and Tech and Steel are like, they're just there, like they do two of the most like gave you goosebumps verses you'll ever see. Introducing themselves as Smif-N-Wessun to me, and I'm holding the camcorder. And that night I called Buck, and I was like, yo, they are incredible. Like, that was crazy. And we brought them in under the management, signed them to Nervous, had really bad deals at Nervous Records, didn't have good representation, didn't have any experience, didn't have any knowledge of the business.
You were 20-something.
Yeah.
Right.
So what's your background before then? How did you even get into the music space? I don't know that I don't know about you.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in White Plains, New York. Then I went to Syracuse University. I interned for the late, great Rob Stone from Cornerstone and Fader, and John Cohen, his partner. John was a fraternity brother of mine at Syracuse. So he was a few years older, and he was like, he knew I was into music. I was like a bad DJ growing up, doing parties and things like that. I was, you know, thought I was a break dancer, thought I was a rapper, like whatever it was. I was
covering all those different bases.
I was entrenched. Like I was entrenched. I was in love with the music. I was in love with artists and like all the elements of it. You know, I was enamored by it. So anyone who met me, by the time I got to Syracuse, I brought all my DJ equipment, and I was doing the house parties and things like that. And again, I will preface it that I wasn't very good, but I had passion, and I knew what I wanted to play, and no one else had equipment. It wasn't like you could plug the iPhone in back, back then. I was invested. And so John Cohen said, you should come work for me over the summer, or come intern for me over the summers, and not particularly me, but I have a guy you're gonna love. And he introduced me to Rob Stone. He was at SBK, which became EMI, and I went and started working in their rap department, which was like a 3-man team. We were working acts like Vanilla Ice and Arrested Development. And then I got assigned to a group out of Corona, Queens called Fifth Platoon. So I don't know, again, this is probably something to Google, but they had a song called The Party Line. And like that was more my style of I really was more, attracted to that, and I started working. And no one else really at the label cared about them because it was more underground for SBK. And so I cut my teeth up there for a couple of summers. And when I graduated, Rob had another friend named Michael Weiss who owned Nervous Records, and he said, "Hey, it's time for you to, go in a different direction, get this job." And it really started as like a little paid internship, and I went up to Nervous and started to head up their rap department, which was all of one person, me.
Right.
So we've seen the Syracuse, then internship, then starting Duck Down. When did you start to see success, and when did this start to click? Like, okay, I'm on to something.
Personal
I'm on the
success.
right path. Yes, personal success.
Well, when I'm up at Nervous, because like it goes so fast when you're saying it. When I'm up at Nervous, this is now like a 2-year period, and this is where I meet Buckshot, because he had just signed a record deal with Nervous, a singles deal. Chuck Chillout was the manager, brought them up. I'm sitting at the front, and Buckshot used to come up to the label like every day. Like maybe he didn't have anything else to do, or maybe he was in the city. He used to sell oils and do different hustles in the city.
You would hear that about the labels, that the rappers were always up and visiting them back in the day. They were based out in New York. People were popping around. If you went there, you didn't know who you'd bump into. That was always the Def Jam story, right? But who was in the building. Yeah.
This is a little label.
Yeah.
And like this is my desk, like right here, and then the couch is right there. So, I'm joking saying he was there every day, but if he came up a couple of times a week, eventually he was there to see, Mike or whatever. And he'd have to sit out front for like, the first 30 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever was going on. So we just started talking, and we became friends right away. And I eventually taught him how to drive, and he taught me how to kick some bars. That was a trade-off. That was a trade-off we made. So yeah.
How far did you go with kicking bars?
My bars went pretty far. Like if you have the Enter the Stage album, I'm on a song with song called "You the Man" with Black Moon, Smif-N-Wessun.
I didn't know.
And Havoc of Mobb Deep.
Okay.
So for me to sit here and be able to say that that's on my resume, that I literally have a song on Black Moon, Enter the Stage album called "You the Man," and got to rhyme with Mobb Deep and Black Moon and Smith. Like one of these kids is doing his own thing. I definitely didn't belong there, but but
you belonged.
They coached me up, and they were rooting for me, and they like made it possible.
Yeah.
I equated it to like if you ever get to like go to NFL like a training camp for a day, like they're like, oh, you want to go to a baseball thing for a day or a football thing, and they just like allowed me to do it.
You got your little piece of memorabilia off of it.
I got a memorabilia off of it.
Got it.
But you couldn't tell me then. You couldn't tell me then that I didn't think that maybe that was for me.
I was going to be a rap star.
Yeah.
So that was when your first sign of success during that time, during Nervous?
Not really. So there at Nervous, I'm doing like everything.
Gotcha.
And I'm, we had these big books, calling radio DJs, calling retail stores, and putting in a lot of time. I'm making probably like $50 a week, enough to cover the train back and forth. And that, but it's like a time that I look back on and I say how pure and how much joy it brought me, like how much love I have for what I was doing. I didn't care.
What was your family saying?
Well, at that point, I was telling them that I was going to be taking the LSTATs and trying to go to law school.
Okay.
Like after a year off from school. I was like, that was my plan. Like, I'll do this for a year, and then I'll go become a lawyer, or at least take the test and see where
We were
that
all
leads
going to
me.
be a lawyer. Or something, right? That's in your head.
But what happened was, along the way, Buckshot and Black Moon make Who Got the Props, and the record starts to sizzle, and things start to happen at a pretty fast pace. Not fast like today, okay?
Yeah.
Because we imagine things today like it just spreads around YouTube, and then but it started to happen at a pace where like every day we were able to do something else. We could go today. We can go to Red Alert. Tomorrow we can go see Kobe Cove in Philadelphia. Maybe we'll make it down to Virginia Beach. Like, so these things were like, one opportunity after the next started to happen, and they filled up the schedule till eventually to the point where the song got really big, and the single deal turned into an album deal. They had their differences with Chuck, and they were looking for management. And Buckshot was very entrepreneurial, very, self-motivated. I helped actually set up some meetings with different managers around the city that he took. And I sat outside a couple of those meetings I didn't even go into. I would sit out front and wait for him. And one time he came out of a meeting with a pretty prominent person, and I'll leave the name out. And he just said, yo, I don't want to deal with any of these guys. Let's just do this ourselves. And I think that was at that moment, that I realized that was some success. He was like, let's make a management company.
There you go.
You keep doing what you're doing. You're driving us everywhere already. You're running us around. Just keep doing it. And he said, well, learn. And having the confidence of an artist, and that's everything, right? Like the artist has to believe in you, and they have to be willing to take some sacrifices for saying, all right, I'm maybe with someone who's less experienced or who doesn't have that many years in, but if they're backing you, that's all you can ask for.
But at that point, it's the loyalty, right? I mean, now they're feeling a loyalty from you that makes it feel like you would be a good partner.
Yeah, I think maybe not so much loyalty, but like just a feeling that I was going to do that. Yeah, like that I was going to do the job, because it wasn't long enough to be loyal to me yet. I think it was more like Buck was looking for the right avenues, and I think that he just believed that I would get it done. So that's what we did. We eventually came up with the name, or he came up with the name. I'll credit him. His publishing company is Target Practice. His favorite artist at the time was KRS, and KRS had the song Duck Down, and there you go. Put it all together.
So who are some of the artists that came after that?
So we spent some time on that album on Black Moon, and I told you we brought in Smif-N-Wessun. Then it was Helter Skelter, which was Rock and Sean Price, and then OGC's Original Gun Clappers.
There you go.
So we brought that all in, and then that became the Boot Camp Clique. Wow. Yeah, that was that's a good 10-year run right there of like, again, piecing that all together. And
how do you describe that run, that music, those artists, and their impact in hip hop?
I mean, it's easy to say it's the golden era. Like people from my era say that a lot, but it was magical at that time, because it's very rare. Even when you look around at other crews and cliques or whatever it is of music at any time period, for me, it was like, damn, it was like each one of these guys was so unique and so individual and had such great personality and charisma and style. Like, it was like the stars aligned. It really was. Like from Black Moon to Smif-N-Wessun to Helter Skelter to OGC, like, and each had a classic debut album. And not, again, you can't just say it's classic because we're sitting here almost 30 years later. Like, I think that, most hip hop connoisseurs would look back and say, yeah, I would give those the classic stamp for each one of them. And it was really cool. Like, it was incredible to be in the studio. It was incredible to like witness it. That was to the point of like me understanding that I wasn't going to be a rapper, is when you get around real incredible artists and you see the talent.
But it's interesting when you fall in the lane that you fall in. I mean, you were meant to, whatever, not be the lawyer route and fall into the situation that you did, since the career's been going on for 30 years.
Yes. I mean, I think the lawyer route, wouldn't have been bad either, because there's so much to be had. There's so much to be had from having that legal degree, and then being able to like other ways. But I wouldn't have been able to do.
Well, school would have removed you
School
from
would
all
have
of
removed
it.
me from it, and there was
From
no
the
way you
experience,
removed me.
right?
Yeah.
Because the schooling becomes the experience within the industry early on, right? So
Right.
that's your kind of master's program, graduate program, and all of that, right?
100%, because now today is like, not to discredit any of my lawyers, but it's like before we call our lawyers, we're able to like do a lot of our contracts and negotiate and do all the things that a good lawyer would do. But now now it's like working with them. But lawyers certainly have their purpose, and it's another level of skill, intelligence. The right ones like are crafty and witty, and all those things matter.
Absolutely.
So you look back, you take a kid today listening to music coming up. How do you explain to them the importance of that run, the legacy of Duck Down, that music? How do you get them to put it on? How do you get them to relate to the sound? Do you not even?
I don't do it so much. I'm like I'm very conscious of things like that, of like not trying to impose on someone what they should listen to or hear. But every once in a while, like my nephew Max, big up to Max. He's 18, and he'll say, oh, he just was like, yo, I really like Nas, and he's like, I really like early Nas work, and he's like, I know for him this is discovery period, and I was like, oh, if you like that, you should listen. And I'll send them like Shit Is Real off Enter the Stage. I'll just send them like one song. Or I work with the comedian Druski, and he's got a crew called the Four Lifers, and they're all young, bunch of great young guys that are into music and sports and culture, and they don't know the history, but once in a while I'll send them something and I'll say, you should listen to this, or I think you would like this, or I'd be interested to even hear their opinion on it. But I want people to experience it. I just don't ever want to be the person that's saying this is what.
Right. Because you were part of it, so you don't want to be forcing down everyone. But
right.
you understand why you think it's so important.
Right.
So you bring up Druski. So I heard you were managing or working with Druski. Correct me, however the term is, but I didn't see that coming a mile away. When everyone was like, so Dru Ha at Duck Down's working with Druski, and I was like, what? I didn't see that. So where does that connection happen? Because there's a large gap 30 years later between that run of music and into this comedian.
I probably jumped out of order in this story, but as I started to work for Cinematic with Johnny Shipes, I started consulting Cinematic in their early days. This is flash forwarding like 15 years from where we started. And Johnny comes up. I was also a music director at Cornerstone, the Cornerstone agency. So the full relationship starting with Rob and John, they brought me back into Cornerstone, which was an ad agency. And they knew what I did running Duck Down, but they needed a music person or a music liaison to kind of run things. And we had lost our deal at Priority Records. I'm now like, going all through it. And we didn't have an office, and so Rob offered me an office, and then eventually let us rent more office space they had a whole floor on 23rd Street.
On 23rd Street,
yeah.
So we took an office in the back, and then Rob gave me an office, and we worked out this arrangement where I would be a music director for him on the brand deals he was working on, in exchange for whatever. We worked out the right deal.
You guys were over there. XXL was over on 25th. Violator was around the corner. We were
Bad Boy
about
was
40,
a couple
40.
of blocks away.
Bad Boy was, so everything was around each other in that kind of quadrant,
Yeah. So anyway, so Johnny Shipes one day came up to the office. Must have been a pitch for Fader, and he was working Big Crit. And he comes in and he's like, he introduced himself, and if you know Johnny, like he just like wears his everything on his sleeves. He holds nothing back. He was like, he was a big fan, and he just like came in and introduced himself to me. I liked him right away just for that. I was like, oh, this guy's giving me props, cool. And anyway, we met that day. A couple weeks later, Cootie from I forget their company's name, but the guys that did the Kanye documentary? Yeah.
Cootie and Chike.
Yeah, they came in to the office one day and they showed me a video of Pro Era of Joey Badass and
I was looking at your Instagram last night. There's a lot of Joey Badass photos on there. Somebody was a Joey fan.
Yeah,
is a Joey fan.
We ended up working together, so it was also a big part of.
Yeah. He was 16 years old. He was on
you
fire.
already
he
knew.
was completely likable, completely different. The Pro Era movement, everything was so individual and so Brooklyn.
It reminded me so much of a young Buckshot and Boot Camp. It was like Pro Era. I didn't know if they were going to have the depth that Boot Camp had. Time was going to tell, but I knew Joey and Steez and CJ Fly. Like I felt like that original offering, Nick Caution, like there was a lot that they were about to be able to establish. And anyway, Cootie shows me the video, and I'm like, who are these kids? And he's like, well, they're independent right now, but they're working with Johnny Shipes. So I hit Johnny up, and I'm like, Johnny, what's going on? Are you gonna get a deal for them? And he's like, I don't really know what I'm gonna do yet. He's like, I'm gonna figure it out. He's like, why, do you want to do something on Duck Down? I was like, yes. He's like, all right, well, if we do a Joey deal, you also have to take a Pro Era album. So I'm like, you kidding me? Like, he was very focused on Crit at Def Jam and still wasn't in that mind state that he could do it by himself. Anyway, a couple months go by, Johnny and I are like playing ping pong back and forth on the deal. And one day he just calls me and says, look, I spoke to Sylvia Rohn. She told me that I could have my own label, like I could be doing my own thing. He was getting frustrated with the major label system. And he said that he was gonna start cinematic over at Red Sony. But he said, you know, they told me, there was a guy up there that was working that said, you know, you could really be a help to me. And so the saying goes, if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, right.
You know, and I was like, oh, I'd love to work on it. And we figured out like a consultation arrangement where we helped, you know, again, in our role was to kind of liaison between the label, the artist, the brand deals, things like that, while Johnny and the cinematic team was dealing with all the creative. So that brought me into Joey's world. And I also got Joey a great deal with Green Label Sound and Mountain Dew. And
I remember all this, yeah.
I put him and DJ Premier together. Yeah. So it's like now I'm starting to see, like we talked about success earlier, like now I'm really starting to see like how you can move different pieces around the board by, maybe you're not, and this is a lesson, you know, learned, it's like, or a lesson taught, is that none of my deals at that time were like, huge salaries or big money. Like a lot of I know counterparts and I have peers in the business that were like, I'm making this, I'm doing this over here. And I was kind of like, you know, we were doing well from our indie stuff. I was, you know, doing okay with the Cornerstone stuff. And then I started the consulting, and now I'm starting to piece them all together. And I'm realizing that I had a lot of, you know, it was like strength in numbers in terms of the relationships and the different places that I could navigate.
Your hands were in a lot of pots, right?
Yeah, and that, you know, you also have to be careful. What's the other saying? A jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
Right? So you also have to be very careful not to take on more than you can handle. But I felt that I had it under control in terms of what I was doing, and I kind of just went with it. And a lot of the dots started to connect. And to me, that's where I really started seeing like, oh, I felt like I was a valuable piece to where I could be and maneuver to artists, to brands, to executives, to, you know, whatever, to labels. I felt like I could.
So when did the music licensing and soundtracks and all of that, because that became a whole other part of your guys' business, right?
Yes. So, well,
but around the same time or no?
Yeah, like I think as an indie, you know, and I watched watched the podcast or listened to the podcast with Steve Stout, and I thought he said some just like incredible things about indie major structure.
Yeah,
and like
right.
I was like listening to it, and he hit it on the head in so many different ways, and I think that. As one thing that he said stuck out to me, which I always said, but instead of using the word indie, I used the word underground. Like artists back then would say, I'm underground. And we would say in our world, well, you're only underground because you can't be major. It wasn't like it was like, I'm keeping it real. Like there was like a whole model. How many songs came out with shit is real, this is real, you know. The motto was that, but the truth was we were all going after the gold and then the platinum.
Right.
Like that was what you were aspiring to. And if you could see other artists that were a Redman or, you know, an Onyx or different artists that were still in your lane that could achieve it, you felt you could also. Like I couldn't, you know, this is a certain sound that could still elevate, a Nas that could still elevate to a certain level. So, you know, I think for us that was like underground became a thing of like independence, and it was more by like not by choice but by necessity because you had no other way to do it.
Well, then so now indie is cool, right? Somebody says they're independent now, it's cool. You're keeping all your money, however people think that works. But you're saying underground and indie by necessity, meaning
you had no other choice.
They had no other choice.
We went to Def Jam. We went to Tommy
So it went
Boy.
from not cool to the cool right now, or
yes,
what? Right?
Yes, yes. It went because then what's and I'm sorry I didn't answer your question because we were
okay.
going over. But yes, so the you know licensing and finding other avenues of revenue were critical for indie artists because we weren't going to beat the majors to the punch at radio.
Yeah.
We weren't going to beat them to the punch at MTV or BET. Those places were on lockdown. So we had to find other ways to get the music out. Like it was like, remember the box where you could call in?
Yeah.
And so we would do, you know, certain street marketing tactics and
Right.
like painting a van and driving it all over the country. And I always felt like we would do certain things until, and not just us, I don't want to say just us, but like companies like ourselves, like a Steve Rifkin at Loud, you know, I mentioned it earlier, No Limit, Master P. I think people like, you know, like-minded people were very influential in terms of like thinking this is how we got to do it. But we were looking for avenues that we could find other revenue streams. And if they weren't concentrating on licensing, then hey, maybe we could call 2K up or ESPN or whatever and get our music in here. And for a while, we felt like there were different places that we could go that the majors maybe weren't putting all their time into.
Were you a stepping stone for artists to people then, because it was in between? Now we get accepted by a major or something like that. So did you ever think of yourselves as stepping stones for the artist? Or
Later.
Yeah.
Later. Not then, but later I used that as a strategy, or thought that would possibly, you know, when we met Young M.A., that was a big pitch to her of like, hey, we can get this started. And if you don't want a long-term deal, no problem. No major label, to her and her manager, Jason, at the time, you know, we said, and we meant it. It wasn't any fluff or bullshit. We were saying like, you go into a major label, they're going to try to lock you up. Like, that's it. It was still it still was right at that bridge of time. And we said, you know, we can put some music out, get you going. The contract will read that at that point, you can go do what you want to do. And we also internally would always say that we felt that if we could prove success then and show them the path, that maybe they wouldn't choose to go that direction.
How did she respond to that?
It took a long time.
She still works with him though, right?
That's what I'm getting to. That's exactly what I'm getting to.
Still works with us, but it took a long time. You know,
Yeah.
we that deal took almost, you know, I don't know, 6 months, 7 months and a lot of meetings, and it took developing some trust. And you know, I knew she wasn't the type at all. Like it wasn't gonna be meaning, trust me, I'm gonna do this for you, I'm gonna do that for you. It was never like, I knew it was gonna have to be really being given a chance to build a relationship with her, to show her that we're gonna do right and that we're gonna be able to come with the right ideas. And
is this prior to Ooh? Did she walk in?
oh
with
yeah,
that,
yeah,
or
no,
it's
no,
just
no.
Way before that.
Yeah, this is probably a year and a half before Ooh.
Okay.
She had, you know, a bunch of other records, but I take, you know, credit for this one, is I saw Chirac was a freestyle she did with a bunch of other artists. I don't know if you remember that video. It was like out in Brooklyn. She's standing in front of a car. It was like
I remember that whole era
a
very
conglomerate
well, yeah.
of artists on that. She had Red Life, and a bunch of those artists were part of the Red Life. But I watched it, and it was like I was glued on her. And I must have watched that video like 50 times, like that weekend or whatever it was. Found a contact. At the time, it only had like a couple of 100,000 views. It wasn't. This was also like early YouTube, where it had that much, we weren't all on it. It was more like a destination, probably, like, let me check this out. Or maybe it was even Facebook. I'm not gonna say MySpace, but it might have even been Facebook
It was
where
like
I saw
Friendster,
it.
I know.
But yeah, we saw it, found the contact, reached out to them, and you know, Steve also said, which I agree with, that you know, majors can be slow and they're getting beat to the punch.
Yeah.
And that's why, and then then even when they find something that they like, an A&R might like it, and then he still has to convince his, his building and his bosses that this is a move. And by the time a deal gets put together, it's 3-4 months down the line. That artist wanted to release 5 more songs.
And sometimes momentum.
So so that type of strategy led to that, and then it worked again for us a few years later with an artist named Jay the Youngin, who again, Johnny introduced me to Jay.
R.I.P., yeah.
Yeah, rest in peace to Jay. And we just, really were enamored with the music that he was putting out. We were like watching the numbers. We were like, man, this is incredible. First time I met him, I'll just be honest, I didn't really get it. I was like, I wasn't sure. It wasn't this New York, East Coast sound that I was, predominantly mixed up with.
Right, that was very Louisiana.
Bogalusa.
So what do you,
Not even New Orleans. Right?
so what do you do in cases like that when you're not really sure about, a record or a sound that one of your artists are putting forward? How do you handle that?
Well, you gotta learn. Eventually, you reach that point where you learn that you're no longer the cool guy, or you're no longer the And I've always had that opinion too, right? Music is art, and everyone has a different opinion of it.
Right.
But we started watching the numbers, and again, I'm taking this back. This is probably 7 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe even longer, maybe 10 years ago.
Right.
Major labels weren't really doing that just yet. They weren't. The Instagram wasn't in its, like, oh, how many followers, how many this. But we did start
That was after SoundCloud, right?
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
not
maybe
after SoundCloud, after SoundScan.
Yeah,
that kind of
after
whole
SoundScan,
run where
right.
everybody
They were
was just
looking at
dedicated at
yes.
SoundScan. Everything was
Yes.
SoundScan driven, right?
Yes, major labels were looking at how
Right.
many did you sell? Blah, blah, blah. That's
Right.
that's all they cared
and
about.
what area did you sell it in, and what store, and what so and all of that. And you guys were going beyond that.
Looking at, saying, oh, this is
Where
this
were
is
those
start-
movements?
I
Yeah.
saw the video go from 20,000. The next week I looked at it, it was at 100,000. 2 weeks later, and then we met him. And when I met him, he had that. What I've always said over my career too is like an instinct of intangibles, like something that certain artists just have, an aura, a glow. I don't know, like I'm not into like
The charisma,
the
wherever
higher
the
powers
charisma
and
comes
stuff
from.
like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, like
when
Yeah,
someone
you
has it
walk
when they
in
walk
someone,
into
yeah.
a room.
and I don't know how you
know.
just describe that. Because it's a weird thing. But
Yeah.
when you combine the two, though,
I always think it's how they're going to make people respond when they walk into a room, right? Is all energy on them, and then what are they going to do with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of that be like a little bit to me of the element of how much can they work into that star power? How much do they know how to
Right.
run the room, to dominate the room, to get you and everybody to want to invest in them, right?
But see, that's true, right? But there's also the side of it of sometimes it's a shyness or a humbleness or a charisma that we think of like, oh, I can dominate the room. Sometimes it's more like I could just be looked at in the room, like you just keep looking over there,
Right.
or
Right.
he's so mysterious. I wish I could get more out of him. I
Yeah.
remember I met Louisville from Louisville Slugger from OGCs. One of the coolest guys I ever met. And the first time I met him, he didn't talk much. And like even watching him perform initially, he was very shy. But there was like a style to him and the intangibles that you have. And Young M.A., met her, very calm, very almost stoic. Doesn't give you a lot of highs and lows, but there's an aura about her that's like, again, it's mysterious and it draws you to wanting to know more about them.
So you've got a you got a young M.A., and you've got a Jada Youngin, and Young M.A.'s gone through some health issues. Jada Youngin dealt with legal issues. So you've now invested time, not at the same time, but as examples, with these artists, and you're coming along these problems with them, and nothing's going as smooth because of a legal situation, and you get the call here or whatever. How do you deal with that? Because that's not the plan when you
Right.
first sign them, right? Or get with them.
Well, I was already well prepared for that because of boot camp, right?
Setting you up,
Like
setting you up.
anyone
yeah.
that I meet, like, do not take Sean Price off do not forget the Sean Price and the era of that, and which also that we dealt with a horrific tragedy with Sean. But you just learn that this is part of the job. It's almost like being a coach or a general manager of a sports team, and we read about all the different things that happen on a sports team, or a player that misses practice, or a player's not doing, acting the way the coach or the team wants them to act in.
Right.
But this is real life, and it does become personal. As much as we're like, oh, this is business, this is not personal. No, it becomes personal.
Yeah.
And you have to find a way to relate or to form a relationship or trust or something to, become a mentor or a friend or a confidant to that person, where they can rely on you and you can handle it in a way where they're going to be comfortable with it too. And maybe that's part of what I've done well over all my years too, is like, I'm not going to overreact, and I'm not going to come in with judgment. I'm going to come in with, criticism and ways, constructive criticism and ways you can improve. But I'm not, from the business aspect of it, I'm going to look at a way to say, how do we still make this work? And so, yeah, Jay was very difficult in the beginning. We had heard things from his manager and his mom and different people about that he got a very talented basketball player, got kicked off the team. So it's kind of like you get a little bit of it coming in.
You know what you're getting into, yeah.
I wrote
bit,
when I wrote the eulogy, if you go to my Instagram at the end, look at the eulogy I wrote for Jay. I really wrote it from the heart. The first time I met him, he was coming in for an interview at Double XL, and as well as Vlad, we had a whole day set up for him. It was the first time he was coming to New York, and he missed 3 planes. And so I walked
I feel like
into
I
the
vaguely
room.
remember this, yeah.
I walked into the room.
Because of Shipes, yeah.
No, but well,
Yeah.
Shipes didn't make him miss the plane.
Yeah,
but
no. I just remembered talking to him about that time.
He's first time he's going to meet us, and his managers, and there was a great guy named Poe, and Noah and I walk in, and I just leaned into him. You know, I had never met him. I was like, Jay, your manager assembled an all-star team. Like, you got, look where you are. He's up in the Cornerstone office. I'm like, this is the day. I read off the day that he had. You're going to go do these, before this, you're coming from Bogalusa. Not that that's a bad place at all, but like, you haven't been exposed to media and all these
100%.
things. This team has lined this up for you, and you missed 3 planes today. You could have threw the whole thing out the window. And, he was just like, yo, my bad, and whatever. And, didn't work. He still went on to miss many planes. I told a very in that eulogy. I told a very funny, sad story. However you mix it up, but it's also classic to the personality. A few months later, he had missed so many planes. He was now tired of hearing it from Noah, Noah, my brother, and my partner on the 3D side. He never holds back. So Noah would just go off on these. He just doesn't have the patience for it. And Jay was probably getting sick of it, and he rented a car in L.A., and they were coming to New York, and we get a call from Homeland Security. The car was rented under our company's name, so we get a call from Homeland Security saying that at LAX they discovered this post 9/11, so very serious of unparked cars. The car was parked at departures, and the keys were in it. So they were like, the rental comes back to, this company, which is yours.
I've never heard of that.
And they're like, what's going on? And we're like, we have no clue. We're like saying, so you're telling us that the car was left at, so anyway, long short.
Don't miss a flight.
He was late. He drove himself. He left the car in the departure lane, and he said, "You told me not." He said, "You told me don't miss any more flights."
You can't be mad at that. Come on.
I was mad, but I was like, that's just legendary. Like the balls, like the audacity, unbelievable that he, was able to do it. Wow. And it turned out to be, I would never recommend it, but it wasn't as bad as we thought. It was just paid a crazy fee to get it.
Yeah.
Back to
it all worked out. Yeah.
So
we do it again. We do it again.
He would do it
if need
again.
be,
Yeah.
So I want to go back to Druski, because you had all this success in many facets within the music business. And how do we transfer to Druski, who is
comedy?
Yeah, comedy, and also very in the culture too.
So you asked this a long time ago, and look how I rambled on and didn't answer it. But I kind of had to go tell that whole story first. And so now through my relationship with Cinematic, Johnny's doing incredible things with different artists, and he's just become a magnet for all different types of culture and different types of artists. And I'm more in the background at this point of my career. And Johnny met Dru. They started. He started managing him with a couple of people on his team.
How long ago was this?
This is probably 5 years ago.
Okay.
I was aware of it, but wasn't really involved. A couple things go wrong with the team that Johnny assigned, and he comes to me and he's like, "Man, it didn't. This isn't going well. You got to check this out." I look at Druski. It was still early, in terms of all his numbers. It was healthy, but it wasn't like what it is obviously today.
Right.
And Johnny said, "Do you and Noah want to come in on this with me and manage him?" And he's like, "You're not gonna you're gonna have to meet him, of course, to meet the team." And so we did. We met. He came to New York. We met him, and little by little, we developed that same, relationship and trust with him. And while it's in a total different space of, like you said, comedy and music, very quickly I realized and saw the similarities of it. And it didn't start where it is right now, which is TV and film, which again, I still see the similarities. Like when Young M.A. had Ooh, and that record came out and the industry found out she was indie, it was Kanye, it was Rockefeller, it was Lior, it was L.A. Reid, it was every label was calling for that meeting. Atlantic and every major label, Steve Stout, every label called for that meeting. So you're going in, and it takes the artist to say what they do or what they do or don't want to do. And today, now with Dru, with all the success he's having, now we're getting every movie.
Same thing,
except it's the movie houses. It's it's big time, whether it's Will Ferrell or Adam Sandler or LeBron through his company, or the names are just massive. But the strategy is very similar. It's like, hey, come work with us under our production companies. In this sense, not for music, but for movies and film. And so, I think that we've been a little influential in terms of that independent spirit of saying it's worked over here, and while we don't profess to know that business as well, the model can still be the same if you own a script or you own a movie versus just selling yourself as the talent. Another thing that Steve said that was great, right? Like an artist just sold 100% of themselves for 8 points or 9 points or whatever. It was a messed up system. So we kind of brought that mentality over to this space. The brand deals I was extremely familiar with from 10 years at Cornerstone, working on that side of it as an agency, and then through all my years of my different artists and the Joey Badasses and all the deals we did for those different artists, and my guys included, came naturally for me to negotiate those type of deals, and eventually we developed a great relationship with Dru. He's super tight with Noah. They're closer in age. Noah's like his day-to-day. And he's got an incredible team around him, too, called the Four Lifers, Chauncey, Solo, Hunter, all these guys. Like, I think it's important to have a good group of people around you. And incredibly intelligent and, knows what he wants to do. Another mark, right, for me was like learning when the artist knew more than I did. In terms of marketing, right? Maybe not in terms of the distribution or overall strategy or how to deal with the finances.
What they were selling of themselves.
They were selling, so Young and May was the first to that. She really showed me social media strategy of like how she was dealing with her fan base. And if we made suggestions, she was like, not like, and she would, we were separated in age enough where she could even joke me and say, just stay in your lane and do that and let me do this. Right. And then Jay, Jay the Youngin was incredible with his social media. He was one of the first artists. I know he wasn't the first, but for me, he was one of the first that I saw like that would just give away cash or give away Xboxes or sneakers, or like he did things that I was like, where's he getting the money to do this from? Like, how's he doing? Eventually he was hitting us up for it. but I couldn't argue with it. Yeah. And then, over to Dru, it's like the skits and the things that he's doing. Like, by no means are we sitting there going, hey, these are creative strategies. Like, no, he's 100% leading on all of that. We're watching and learning and then finding a way to maximize it.
You're following and amplifying.
Exactly, following and amplifying.
But it also sounds like they also have a very keen pulse on not just the culture, but also their fan base, too, and how to make them move, you know, and call to actions as well, too.
And unbelievable to watch artists say no. Because and unbelievable to watch artists say no to big money. And again, I go back to those big three for me: M.A., Jay. Well, not Jay so much. More, I'll say M.A. and Dru. Yeah. Both very selective with what they choose to do. Through the relationships over the years, we were talking about. A lot of people hit me up, think I can just get something. I'm like, I'll put it in front of them, but they're going to ultimately make the decision. Whether and both of them said no just as much as they said yes. And it's important for an artist to be able to turn down things, even when there's big dollars attached to it, if it doesn't make sense for their brand. Yeah.
So is there a long-term planned future for Duck Down in the television and film space?
I wouldn't say for Duck Down per se. Like, I think that we look at Duck Down as and Buckshot hates the term, but for me, it's like I look at it as this legacy label, like this classic, moment of time of like what it was. And I'm not trying to, reinvent it or put, maybe along the way there'll be an artist there'll be another Joey Badass or something that I feel fits that mold, and we'll keep it a lot, like, we'll keep it there to be that, to be celebrated, to like Hip Hop 50 was so big. It was so great for a lot of my artists, like just in terms of, Duck Down 30 is coming up. There's ways to celebrate the time of what it was, but I don't want to also, we've gone in different directions. And so my companies are, the companies that I have, are, some of them are run with different people, some of them are not, it's not the same units for each one. But there is the plan for Lifers, which is Dru's company, and which we're a part of working on that is to go into to be the production company for his TV and films. Okay. So yes, and it's taken on a world of new opportunity and new things for us. This I don't know when this is going to air, but we're doing a Coulda Festival where Coulda Fest in Atlanta. He sold out 10,000 tickets. We did a tour with him last year, and he was selling out 3,000-4,000 tickets a night. And we just, know, coming from the music space, you know how difficult that is. If you're not an arena artist, the people that are watching this, sometimes everyone thinks Jay, Drake, Wayne or Kendrick, or like you think of the biggest names, but there's hundreds of artists that are successful that live in a space where
that's why I was always fascinated with Tech Nine's movement, you know, and how he existed with his fans and everything that they
ahead
did,
of the game.
you know, ahead of the game, and carved out their own area, which didn't have to be superstar, but pretty successful in their own right through all of that,
Yes.
you know, and other artists like it, but that was the one that really struck me of look how you can live and have your career and your fan base and everything without having to take it to some super duper next level and have all the fame that you need and the money, you know?
Yeah, and then on the label front, like Rhyme Sayers, right? Like
Right,
labels like that figured it out before this wave of independence and you know through
early on trendsetters and all of it. Yeah. Okay, so what are some moments that you were around that you can't believe you were around in hip hop history? I love this question for some reason.
You know, I like this question too. I because I started as a fan of the music, I really did. You know, it was like for me, I was around some of my idols, like just like guys that I looked up to that I couldn't. Like one early on was like Sadat X, like being in the studio. OGC's had a record with Sadat, and like coming out of college, like that's all like Brand New Being. That was like that album was on repeat for me. So like early on, getting to meet Sadat and see him, Derek X, see him in the studio. And watch that go down, and I use that as one example. But then it was like, you know, Smif-N-Wessun brought Raekwon in for Black Trump, or you know, we spent 2 weeks at Tupac's house living with Pac and working on an album called One Nation with him.
That was like a whole other level of drop over there, right? Then we spent 2 weeks at Tupac.
I know, right?
Right. I mean, you know, like because but
no one had that story.
But I put
unbelievable moment.
He had a house somewhere.
But I put just as much of what you asked me, just as much on Sadat as like that was like Derek X about 6 feet tall. Like I was like, get a fresh fade from Rob. Like I'm looking at Derek X, like all these things are going through my mind. I'm like, we should make the I'm telling like Strang, we should make like Punks Jump Up. Like he asked for it. Like I'm telling him certain of my favorite lines, and we should make that a song. And they're looking at me like, yo, calm down. So those moments, and then you know, this is crazy too, is that we got to make an entire album with KRS-One. So I don't, you know, you have to like really know the Duck Down catalog, but KRS-One and Buckshot made an album together called Survival Skills. And this also came off of the Cornerstone relationship, because I was able to get, we were working on a campaign for Nike for the Air Force One, and we did a track called Classic, and it was Kanye, Rakim, KRS, produced by Rick Rubin, eventually remixed by DJ Premier, the one that you will know now. And I helped like put that all together. And so one of my key elements in that was going to KRS, because I had the relationship with him from Mad Lion and Nervous, and that's a whole other story, whatever. But in doing that, you know, Buckshot was, say he's over here, and I'm saying, Buck, yo, I'm going to the studio tonight with KRS, he's working on this. And I was like, wouldn't it be crazy if we like asked him to do a song, or like, would that be wrong? And he was like, forget a song, like let's ask him to do a whole project. And so like by using corporate money, right? Like being able to like, there was some corporate dollars brought to the table, which made it real in terms of like what we were offering. Not saying that that's what got the deal done, but it made talks a whole lot easier, because you're like saying, all right, I can do this over here, I can't do that over here, but like what if we work on both? And you know, KRS, I couldn't believe it, but he agreed to do an album with us and put it down on Duck Down. And then we spent like a month in the studio, you know, every night watching and getting to be there to like watch KRS-One work. Yeah. And I shouldn't even say a month, because we worked on it for like a month. KRS probably came in like 4 or 5 nights, knocked his shit out, like all his verses. Like he let us put the songs together. Like these are things like this become unbelievable to think. Like he wasn't a control freak. He wasn't like, he's like, nah, I want Buckshot to show me like what he wants to do, and he's like, I'll follow the lead. And then, you know, to have that time and those conversations, they're priceless. We did another one with Pete Rock. Pete Rock produced a whole album for Smif-N-Wessun, Monumental, a whole album. Like, you know, getting to work and talk to Pete like that was super cool for me. And then, you know, developing my relationship with Ninth Wonder, Static Selector, like all these guys that I, you know, I'm not gonna say I look up to those guys. They were younger than me, but they became like people that I really were fans of and respected. Yeah. Those are the best. Being in studio sessions with, you know, Mary J. Blige, like Buckshot got a song on that KRS-One album with Mary, did a hook, and it came from a guy that helped me train for the marathon. His name is Mark, and Mark Jenkins. Mark Jenkins trained Puffy to do his marathon. And then we met him. Turned out that he was a big duck down fan. And so when I ran the marathon, Mark helped me. He gave me a couple of training lessons. And then he called me one day. He said, Mary bumps Buckshot in the studio all the time. And I was like, Mark, could you make the connection? He was like, yeah. And she turned out to be a big fan. And those type of moments when you find out like the people that are the superstars and they're like noticing what you did and, what you are a part of, those to me are the most fulfilling.
Right.
Yeah. So what are you looking forward to next?
A little peace and quiet, a little more. I think in my later years of this, I've learned now I'm learning to be more selective to take on what I want to take on. Avoid some of the headaches where it's possible. But I'm super excited about the TV and film space.
Yeah,
it's
I'm sure.
It's incredibly exciting to like just kind of like broaden out a little bit, to meet new people, meet all these, and then to have a conduit like Druski in the space, and to be so creative and to come up with ideas. And now I can chime in now and then on like things that I think would be cool, or I can maybe show him something that he didn't know from back in the day, and like say, hey, this would be a cool thing. What if we modeled it after this? And every once in a while, he'll say, all right, like.
His video the other day of him being the fashion.
Oh my
the
God!
fashionista wearing the clothing.
Yo.
I mean,
It's hilarious.
That was everywhere.
He doesn't tell us at all. Like as management, he does
just
not.
see it.
We just see those. Like those are thought of, self-produced, self-taped. Him and his team they do that all. So we see it at the same time you see it.
Right.
A lot of times he doesn't trust us. Like he doesn't even want us because he doesn't want the feedback.
Yeah.
But we're like, yo, you can't use the iPhone. You got to use the Google phone.
Right.
So like we still come in with like, why? And then, oh yeah, you're right. Like so like send it to us so we can at least do those type of checks.
The words of management.
Right.
Don't
Yeah,
use this, use that. Where's the deal is. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really
Thank you.
appreciate your time. This was a great conversation.
Absolutely.
One of my favorites.
Really good.
Oh man, thank you guys.
And thank you for joining us with XXL's Inside Track podcast. Until the next one.